Hey there hunters, welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Since the Remnant patch dropped and kinda made Archon playable without being totally busted now, I've been trying a few different ways to play mod and skill builds that don't include bugs and exploits. You know who you are. Anyway, today is going to be a short video because we're going to be taking a different spin on a build that recently made, which was the skill loop build, and we're going to modify that for actual skill use. Originally, I had made the skill loop build to sustain buffs for generic ranged gameplay, and that's fine, and it's effective. But I always like playing with alternate means to deal damage. I love minion builds, I love status builds, and just all the non-normal types of damage in any game. So with this build, we're going to be focusing on the Archon's Havoc form and sustaining that through the same crit stacking Devoured loop ring, but with the twist that we kind of have to go all in on skill damage, since we're based on Havoc form, right? So let me introduce you to the Havoc loop build. Obviously, the core to this build is the combination of Archon's Havoc form skill and the sustain of Devoured loop. And as such, obviously one of our archetypes has to be Archon. Now sadly, Archon has nothing in its kit to actually support skill damage or skill anything related. It's all mod stuff. I guess Flashcaster kinda counts for skill builds, but we can also get that on any archetype, so really we just have Archon for the skill and make zero use of anything else, which kinda sucks to be honest. Now, to pair with Archon, we went with Engineer for two reasons. The first is that because Engineer has skill damage and more importantly skill crit as its damage perk, and we need that for Havoc form. The second is that the turret can be placed and used simultaneously with Havoc form, so you can kinda double dip on some DPS. Again though, unfortunately Engineer's kit is mostly for the heavy carry aspect of the skills, and we're not using that at all. We also unfortunately use Engineer as the prime so we can boost our turret with overclock, because the Archon Prime generates mod power, which isn't going to help us at all because we're not really using mod power. And these two classes have absolutely no synergy with them whatsoever, so yeah, we're off to a good start. We do have mods on one side and skills on the other, but no cohesion. And as such, the biggest downfall to using these two archetypes is that our range damage is absolutely abysmal. Like, wow, when you shoot, you might as well just be dealing no damage. But there must be a big upside, right? Unfortunately, not really. Before I dive into the gear, I want to point out that of course this is not going to be as strong as Hugs setups, melee, abusing damage reduction things, abusing malevolence, crescent moon, any of that stuff. Of course it's not. Even so though, I was hoping that skill damage could perform admirably as it requires a bit more effort to cycle everything properly compared to just turning on buffs and shooting or just equipping heavy carry and just holding it down. And while Palpatine hands and the automated turret sounds like that would be the case, it's really a lot to manage. Having to constantly use skills and mods with animations that can't be cancelled will get you killed quite often in Apocalypse. However, the damage per second sustained is okay at best. I think I can pump out about 3k DPS on average, which is honestly pretty respectable as long as you're not going to compare it to like Hugs who can dish out like 5 to 6k pretty easily. However, the big part about this build that I actually don't like, besides just all the micromanaging the skills and the mods and stuff, is that it just feels kind of like wasted effort, you know? Like, clearing trash mobs is significantly more difficult once you're out of Havoc form because you do zero damage with your guns. So at best, you're significantly worse than just playing ranged weapons, you know, just like bossing DPS and straight up damage. And at your worst, you might as well not have weapons at all once you're waiting for like cooldowns and stuff. And I mean, I'll discuss that last part in a future vid. Anyway, I'm getting kind of ranty. It's not to say that this build is trash. It's good, it clears, it does damage, it does plenty of damage, it's fairly safe. You can see I can do most of the bosses on Apocalypse without taking a hit, and I'm doing them in, I mean, well, worse time than other builds for sure, but it's not terrible. We're not speedrunning here. So the build works, and it's unique because it relies entirely on our skill damage. It just doesn't feel like the effort's worth the output. But with that derailment out of the way, apologies, let's discuss the gearing of the build. Typically, I start with the armors and the relic. And for the armor, you can actually use whatever weight class you want. While in Havoc form, we can freely move and blink regardless of our weight, so you're free to load up on Letos if you want some extra damage reduction. Of course, you have to be careful of the flop outside of Havoc form, so I still recommend running less than ultra heavy weight, but the option is there. And then we have the relic. And I'm actually opting for the Lifeless Heart relic here as it has double relic capacity so we can hold 20 of these. The reason for this is that because we want to keep moving our turret around with us as much as possible. and we can use these and the Engineer Relic perk to regain heavy ammo and redeploy our turrets much more frequently. The fragments are going to be skill damage, elemental damage, which is just more lightning damage, and skill and mod cast speed, because we need to stack as much cast speed to get as much damage out of our lightning hands. Moving on to our trinkets. Finally, we have some interesting choices besides the crit spam stuff, but we're still kind of using crit spam stuff. First is that the amulet we're using is the Jester's Bell. Now, we want as much skill cast speed as possible, as I mentioned, and the amulet provides a meaty portion of that. Plus, it gives us 15 seconds of 20% skill and mod damage whenever we use a skill or a mod, which is what we're mostly going to be using anyways. So that's basically always up. Silver Ribbon works here as well if you want to use that. I did try the mod route using just like Spirit Wisp Amulet and then spamming mods to sustain Havoc form. And while that is good to sustain, basically you're going to be losing your amulet slot for damage. And because Havoc form scales on your cast speed, you're actually losing a lot more damage than it looks like. Because even though I could sustain Havoc form better with Spirit Wisp Amulet, ultimately Havoc form's damage was no better than just continuing to use mods at that point, so it was just pointless. Okay, rings. Obviously we mentioned we're using Devour Loop to reproc Havoc form. Unfortunately, we don't have that much crit, and there's no real way to get mod or skill crit chance. So unfortunately, we're stuck to pairing Devour Loop with our Burden of the Gambler, and this hurts my soul so much because losing weak spots is bad, even though we focus most of our damage on Havoc form. And this is why our guns feel awful, because we just kinda have to do it. Reason being is that Havoc form can proc Devour Loop, and it doesn't do weak spots anyways, so there's a chance that we can refresh while it's active and then just use it again right away. So because of that, we're using this ring and the Engineer's perk for a whopping 20% crit chance, which is pitiful. And we're also going to be using the Kinetic Psycho Stone because, as I mentioned time and time again, we need as much skill cast speed as possible for Havoc form. Lastly, we have a few choices for our last ring. Probability Cord is always a good choice, but I ended up using Burden of the Destroyer for 15% all damage, since we're going to be doing a lot of different actions, least of which is range damage. Kinda wanted some more global damage in here. And now I know what you're thinking. How can you be crit fishing with 20% crit chance, where the range setup gets like 80%? A lot of hits is how. So for the weapons, obviously I'm going back to the same setup using Typewriter with Momentum and Corrosive rounds, because that's a good 65% right there. And we're just fishing for crits with that. That's all the guns for crit fishing. Our handgun though is Nebula. Gross, I know. The only reason why I'm actually using Nebula is because Swarm is a lot of hits, and those hits can crit, and those crits can proc Devour Loop. So typically I would throw out Nanite Swarm before I go into Havoc form, and hopefully get a proc while I'm in the Havoc form. You actually don't want to run things like skill duration through the Stone of Continuance, because while that seems good on paper, we're actually at just a perfect amount of time to hold down our Palpatine hands and run out of our Havoc form mod while we run out of Jester's Bell. So we actually don't have any time in Havoc mode where we're actually losing the damage from Jester's Bell. And then the traits here are a little weird, you can take a look, but the important things here are footwork of course, but for different reasons. While you're in Palpatine hands mode, that is considered ADS, so you get a lot faster while you're actually holding down your lightning skill. So fast enough that you can actually evade attacks without having to blink sometimes. It's very handy. Get it? Handy. We didn't bother to get expertise because we're just fishing for the crits anyways, so it doesn't really make sense to go for skill cooldown. And then the last important thing is I did get Glutton for the relic spam to regen the turret ammo. And of course this set looks jank and performs kind of jank, right? And yeah, that's exactly right. The Havoc loot build has a lot of weird pieces and a lot to maintain, and it's definitely not worth the effort, but it's still fun, and it's still unique, and that counts, right? But that's basically going to be all for me, so thank you all for watching, and hopefully someone can improve on my Havoc loot build. I would really appreciate it. Let me know. Thank you all to my Patreon members again as always. So one final thanks, and good luck out there, hunters.